So welcome back to the second, this week's second video on Fatal Film Friday. In today's case, we're actually going to be going to Texas, my home state. We're actually going to be going to Kaufman, Texas, which is a town about 100,000 people, about an hour or so away from Dallas. And so this is a very interesting case. You may have heard of it, you may have not, but here's my take on it. And let's go and get started.
You had your fun, bet you're sorry now. You dressed me in white to just lay me down. I would've stayed till death took me out, but then you fucked up and gave me the gun. So I'll give you one more shot.
Of course, we got to start with our killer. There are actually technically two killers. It's actually technically a killer couple case for this one. However, of course, this being Fatal Film Friday, we are going to start off with our female killer. So we have Kimberly Irene Williams. Now, I couldn't actually find her date of birth, but she was said to have been raised in Dallas. She graduated Skyline High School and did work at the Southern Methodist University and the University of Texas at Arlington. On May 13th, 1998, she would marry Eric Lyle Williams, who was born on April 7th, 1967. So I was able to get his date of birth, but not hers, in case anyone was wondering why. Eric was said to have been a Boy Scout and a school band. He would attend Texas Christian University, where he was involved in the ROTC, which basically is kind of like a military thing. He served as captain of the Texas State Guard at one point. He was a police officer in White Settlement, Texas, but getting fired after 8 months. He would go work in Springtown, Texas, where the system was hacked, and it was revealed that Eric had actually did it. So obviously this resulted in him getting fired again. And so then after this, he would somehow get accepted into law school. He would start working as Justice of the Peace. And so from here, it looks like Eric's life, Kim and Eric's life is basically going up. And so then after the two were married, Eric apparently made comments about how he would be a successful mass shooter, which obviously, is very concerning. This was disturbing because he did in fact have a gun collection. So, yeah. Sadly, Kim at one point would be diagnosed with rheumatoid arthritis and would later be prescribed narcotic painkillers to deal with her condition. And so then because of this, Kim would end up having to go on disability. So, of course, Kim is getting disability checks at this point. Eric would sneak on one fateful day, it's a Sunday in 2012. Eric would sneak into the back of the courthouse he was working in and steal 3 computers, all worth about $600 after court hours, so not to get caught on camera, even though obviously there are cameras, because again, this is a courthouse. And so he has the computers, he's obviously caught on camera, he would be arrested and was given an offer to plead guilty, so he can get a misdemeanor charge, so I guess he could still have his profession and stuff. He declined because he did not want a misdemeanor on his record. He was put on 2 years probation, so no jail time, but his license was suspended on April 10th, 2012, and lost his job due to him having a felony on his record. And so being a felon means you also can't have guns for obvious reasons. So then he had to go sell his guns to make a living because again he just lost his job while also living off Kim's disability at the time. Mark Hasse and Michael McClellan knew about the guns and they wanted to make sure they were all out. Eric had moved most of them out. That was under a friend's name while deputies had took a few of them. So most of the guns he even had left, he went ahead and took them out because I guess he kind of knew they were coming to come get them. And so a little bit about Mark and Michael. So Mark Edmund Hasse and Michael Elgin McClellan were the ones who prosecuted him. And so Mark Hasse was born on November 1st, 1955, and Mike was born on August 23rd, 1949. So then Mike was in the Army for 20 years. So he was an actual veteran, and he apparently didn't like Eric because Eric was apparently pretending to be a veteran. We're calling him Mike instead of Michael for the story because that's what he was called mostly. And so Mike had applied for the district attorney office, and Eric had set him up to lose by claiming that he was taking CPS cases against the state, which apparently, I guess it's not illegal, but it was successful. Eric's sabotage plan was basically successful, and Michael ended up losing that race. And so he would later get that position that he had lost with Mark as his assistant. So basically, Mike is the district attorney, and then Mark is the district attorney assistant. So they're working together, if that makes sense. I don't know how this found this out, but Mark and Michael would end up having one of Eric's ex-girlfriends named Janice Gray from the 90s, so that they dated in the 90s, to testify that he had threatened to shoot her after they broke up to prove that he was, I guess, a violent person, even though this wasn't really a violent crime that he committed. And so, of course, Eric had obviously never told Kim this before. So he told her this wasn't true. She believed him. Eric would blame District Court Judge Glenn Ashworth for telling the pair, Mark and Mike, about the incident, because how else would they know about that? He had allegedly pulled a gun on a couple in a parking lot, killed cats simply because he disliked them, and he often threatened to kill himself and Kim. And so, Eric had allegedly would drug Kim with liquid morphine, because remember, she is going through this disability, so she has like all these painkillers, and I guess like liquid morphine was one of them, and it got to the point to where she couldn't even like think like straight. And so this would end up being very tragic, because on January 31st, 2013, Eric and Kim would set up on a plan to kill Mark while driving a Mercury Staple. And so they would park near a pharmacy near the courthouse, so that way like the car was not seen at the courthouse, but someone was there, so they left, because again, they didn't want no witnesses. And so then they went to the courthouse parking lot and waited for Mark to park in his usual spot. So then once he got out, he would kill Mark in front of the courthouse before 9 a.m. wearing a mask. And so Kim would later claim that she actually couldn't watch the murder, but she did ask Eric if Mark had said anything before you shot him. And then he basically told her that he had said no, and apparently like, I'm sorry. Eric would later say that Mark's death was actually inspired by the movie Tombstone, which apparently was like a movie from like 1993. Mark was actually said to have been armed, because remember, he's a district attorney, so he's gonna have like a lot of enemies, so he knew like there's a good chance somebody might try to kill him. Sadly, he wasn't able to obviously get his firearm off him to defend himself before Eric killed him. And so Eric would get away with Kim driving, so Kim is a getaway driver in this murder. Kim had took a Valium Valium when she got home, and then went to sleep after this murder. So then the town obviously is on high alert, because crimes, especially violent crimes, apparently aren't that often in this town. So then it was believed that it could be a mob pit or a white supremacy group named Iran Brotherhood. Because again, this is a district attorney, so he's going to have like a lot of enemies. And so they were looking at people that just got released around the time, and they were trying to figure out like, where were they at? Were they involved anyhow? And so one of the things they did have was a getaway vehicle. The getaway vehicle was said to have been a gray sedan. Mike McClellan had made a statement saying they were going to catch whoever committed the crime and punish them to the full extent of the law. Mike had even believed that Eric was responsible and told everybody, but obviously there wasn't like enough evidence. Police would go to Eric's house, and he wasn't like a fake little arm sling, and basically saying he was injured, so he couldn't obviously have done it. He was tested for gunpowder residue, but it came back negative. How it came back negative, I don't know. He must have been wearing like a glove or something. And later, obviously there was news coverage of Mark Hassey's murder, because again, he is a district attorney. So this is like a high-profile case you can imagine. And so Eric was later said to have actually loved the news coverage. And so Mike brought guns to the courthouse. He bought guns for the courthouse workers just in case, like, to prevent another murder from happening, which, again, understandable. Sadly, on March 30th of that year, Mike and Cynthia, his wife, would be gunned down in their home by Eric. And so he was wearing Eric was wearing a bulletproof vest with a word sheriff on it, even though he obviously wasn't a sheriff. How he got it, I don't even know. And so this is the day before Easter, which Kim would later say that was intentional. And so they believe with Easter being tomorrow, they would have no law enforcement protection because, well, the police are hanging out with their family because it is Easter. Also, the Mercury Sable that they used for Mark's murder, they did not use that this time. Apparently that vehicle was not usable at the time, so they used a white Crown Victoria car, which is like, I guess, like a former cop car. And so then they left. The McClellans had sat, despite the tense city, because like a Mark's unsolved murder, the McClellans left their door unlocked, which is believed to be how Eric even got in the first place. And then 20 shots were fired, with 16 apparently hitting Mike and 8 hitting Cynthia. Eric had shot Cynthia like an extra time because she was still moving, and again, he didn't want no witnesses. Him and Eric go to Kim's parents' house, where they go cook steak and celebrate it. And so Eric would later go drop the murder weapon into Lake Tacoconi with like in a black bag, not like by itself. And so the next day, Eric would make a threat using his computer, saying a list of demands and ultimatums. A $200,000 award would eventually like be offered for any information involved, like who could have killed Mark or Michael or both, because I believe they were connected since they worked together. 12 days after the murder, Eric had eventually lured up the judge's time. And he fired those lawyers and then talked to the police and the press, because again, obviously he loves the news coverage. So they would search Eric's house and paper and they found like the username of the Crime Stoppers, because apparently they had like a local Crime Stoppers, and the username that was used to make like these anonymous threats were made, and they matched and password matched and everything. So it was confirmed that Eric is the person making these threats. So then he would obviously be arrested for making terroristic threats. And so the next day, a friend of his calls the police station and is like, hey, this little storage unit that Eric has, I guess, like, Eric paid for it, but it's under, like, his name, so they wouldn't, like, just look under it, because, like, it's not under Eric's name. Storage unit And they would find badges, police uniforms, vests, ammo, and guns, and the car they were looking for. The Crown Victoria and apparently the Mercury staple were in there. They would also find homemade napalm. CCTV footage would show Eric taking the car out the morning of the McClellan murders and then returning it like right after he killed them. The two were arrested on April 18th, with Kim having a $10 million bond and Eric having a $23 million bond. Eric would be charged with murder. Cynthia's trial would be first. Defense would say that the murder weapon has never been found, saying that nothing really ties him to the murder. And the jury would eventually find him guilty regardless. Because again, Cynthia was pretty much an innocent person. Like, why did she have to die, pretty much? And so, Kim, of course, would actually turn on Eric and end up being the star witness for the prosecution. She would say how he threw a black bag with the murder weapon into, like, the lake that I told you guys about. And that's where he would later be found. So they ended up finding the murder weapon in the lake. She would say that if Eric had not been caught, he would have been using his little hit list that he made. And so these plans included a crossbow and the napalm that was found earlier. Early Wiley and Glenn Ashworth were among that list. The plan was to wait until after the Super Bowl that year, which was February 3rd, to go to Glenn's house to shoot him with a crossbow and then open his mouth and then open his stomach contents, because once you shoot him with the open his stomach up, because once you shoot him with the crossbow, he's going to be pretty, messed up, obviously. And then you put the napalm inside. So, obviously, I'm assuming that's going to hurt, obviously. And then Wiley, who was a woman, was put on the list because apparently she had stopped him from overcharging on CPS cases. Because I remember at one point, Eric was working on CPS cases. Apparently, he was, overcharging. So, he was making good money just from lying about these CPS cases. And so, instead of targeting Glenn first, because remember I said February 3rd, he decides to get Mark first at the courthouse instead of his home to show it's a public murder. It's to strike fear in the public's eyes, which was successful if that was the plan. And so she also admitted to helping the getaway driver along with helping him plan the murders. She claimed that her being addicted to oxycodone, morphine, Valium, poor vigil, etc. caused her to believe everything that Eric was telling her. And so Kim would end up filing for divorce after she helped the prosecution put Eric away. And so then Kim, I guess as a plea deal from prosecution, because again, this is pretty much a high profile case. She winds up getting 40 years while Eric ends up getting the death penalty, but Kim is eligible for parole and said she was eligible for parole in 20 years after she got sentenced. Eric appealed, blaming brain damage from diabetes as to why he committed the murders. Eric is still on death row until a certain amount of time has passed, and then he'll be executed by lethal injection, because remember, this is the state of Texas. The divorce was finalized in January 2018. On May 14th, 2018, Eric's appeal would be denied, because obviously his appeal to get off death row was denied. He had made another appeal in August 2019, and it is unknown the status of that current appeal. However, he is still listed on Texas's death row, so that is probably going to be a no as well. However, if you look up Kim's record, for some reason she does not pull up. So, is it possible that she's out right now? Possibly, but highly doubt it, considering, again, this was a high-profile case. So yeah, that was the case of the Kaufman County killers, and I will see you fail with the last case for this week.